The new year is a magical time. There is a sense of change in the air, and it seems that life is turning a page, giving us a chance to start over. In the first weeks of January, we are always filled with a desire to finally correct all the mistakes of the past and begin the journey to our best life. Someone plans to start exercising, someone plans to start a new business, someone decides to say those very words that they have been holding back for months, and someone wants to change everything in their life at once. The heroine of our story, Mimi Wong, was more determined than ever to make her life better than it had ever been. Right after the New Year of 1970, which she celebrated alone in her small but cozy rented apartment on Everett Road in Singapore, Mimi promised herself that she would finally get rid of the problem in her personal life that had been tormenting her. Tired of romantic twists and turns, the girl concluded that she simply could not live on peacefully without trying to remove the obstacle in the way of her long-awaited happiness. But it was this very decision that would lead to her death. The first days of January were incredibly challenging for Hiroshi Watanabe. Work was already in full swing at the bustling office of a large Japanese developer located in Singapore's business center. An important land reclamation project in the east of the city had to be completed on time. Hiroshi, the lead engineer on this project, had been working overtime since early November. Now, after the winter holidays, with a deadline for the project's completion approaching, the workload had intensified. On the morning of January 6th, Hiroshi woke up in the arms of his mistress, Mimi Wong, in the apartment he had rented for her, specifically chosen for its proximity to his own home. Over breakfast, she gently asked him if he could come over that night and stay with her. Unfortunately, the lover declined, explaining that he had not spent time with his family, his wife, and 3 children for a long time. Hiroshi did not yet realize that if he had answered this question differently, his life would have unfolded in an entirely different way. But what if he had stayed with Mimi on that fateful night? Instead, the night of January 6th began for him with the tears and cries of his children, a bathroom completely covered in blood, and hours of interrogation by the police. When Hiroshi Watanabe entered his home on Jalan Sea View, exhausted after a long day at work, all he yearned for was to take a quiet bath, enjoy a can of beer, and then head to bed. However, as soon as he stepped into the hallway, he was greeted by muffled sobs and moans that bore a childlike quality. Yet these were unlike the usual sounds that follow a minor childhood scuffle. Instead, these cries resembled a heartbroken, profound, and desperate plea for help. Yet they were quiet and exhausted. Quickening his pace, almost running, he made his way to the bathroom, from where the heart-wrenching sounds emanated. The scene was greeted, his would-be etched in his memory forever. His 3 children, the oldest of whom was only 9 years old, were sitting on the bathroom floor in light nightgowns soaked with blood, embracing their mother, Ayako Watanabe. The children did not react to words or touches. As if under a spell, they clung to their mother's already cold body. Ayako, what happened?" Hiroshi began to shout at the top of his lungs, not yet realizing the full extent of the horror unfolding before him. Receiving no answer, a gradual understanding of the hopelessness of the situation began to dawn on the head of the family. His skin turned pale, his eyes seemed to forget how to blink, and his hands convulsively tried to lift the children off the floor. but with every passing second, Hiroshi lost what little composure he had left. In less than a minute, in a fit of hysteria, he began to shake and fell to the floor with his children, trying to discern if his wife was still alive. But Ayako had been dead for several hours. What happened here? The inconsolable husband continued to shout in a hoarse voice. His 9-year-old eldest daughter, Chieko, without letting go of her mother, whispered through her tears. It was Auntie Mimi. In that very moment, the puzzle pieces fell into place in Hiroshi's mind. He understood what had happened. His mistress had killed his wife. Wong Weng Siu, better known to the world as Mimi Wong, arrived at the Watanabe family home accompanied by her ex-husband, Sim Woo-kum, ready to do anything for a spark of long-extinguished youthful love and a small monetary reward, of course. Having conspired, they became the perpetrators of the crime that took the life of Ayako Watanabe, an innocent woman and mother of 3 children. In hell there is no fury like a woman scorned. The famous words of William Congreve resonate with particular force, for they find a direct reflection in our story today. Filled with tragedy and despair, Mimi Wong went down in the annals of crime as the first woman sentenced to death in Singapore since its independence. Together with her ex-husband Sim Woo-kum, she was found guilty of the murder of Ayako Watanabe. Thus, they became the first couple to be subjected to the death penalty in Singapore. Fate decreed that their life paths would be cut short simultaneously on July 27, 1973, when they met their inevitable end by Hanan striking the final chord in this grim symphony of murder, love, and betrayal. Mimi's childhood could not be called a happy one. Born in 1939 on the outskirts of Singapore, under the roof of a humble dwelling belonging to a poor family, little Weng Siu entered the world where joy and carefree living were luxuries beyond her reach from the very beginning. Her father, the sole support and protector of the family, Hearth, earned a modest living through various odd jobs, while her mother, Leong, struggled with an ailment that robbed her of the strength even for the most menial work. The little that Mimi's father earned was scarcely enough to feed themselves and little Weng Siu. The tragedy struck the Wong family a month before Weng Siu's first birthday. Her father, the family's sole breadwinner, passed away for unknown reasons, leaving his wife and young daughter in the depths of poverty and despair. For Leong, this was a critical blow that shattered her health completely. A few days later, the last of their money ran out, and there was simply nothing left to feed her daughter. In desperation, wrapping her daughter in a humble towel, Leong brought her to the doorstep of her late husband's first wife, Ho San, whose household was already raising 9 children from their shared husband. Begging her to take pity on the baby, Leong pleaded only for one thing: to give her daughter a chance at life and take her into Ho San's family. Thus, Wong Weng Siu came to live with her father's first wife and her 9 half-brothers and sisters. She was never considered one of their own in that household. She was always an outcast in the family. Rejected and acknowledged, she became the target of cruelty from her stepmother as well as her half-brothers and sisters, who tormented her both physically and mentally. Frequent beatings became one of the reasons for the formation of Mimi's complex character and gave rise to the development of mental disorders to which she was genetically predisposed. During meals, she was not allowed to join the family at the table and usually ate the leftovers after the whole family had finished eating. Education became an unattainable dream and an impossible luxury for her. Every day, Wang Xiao's life was filled with hard labor, cleaning, and washing for those who could have been her real family, but she remained nothing more than a pitiful servant to them. At the age of 14, Wong Weng Siu embarked on the path of adult life and started her first job, immersing herself in the monotonous routines of factory work. Every day, she exhausted her strength to the limit, earning a meager income that was enough only to feed herself, but did not allow her to escape the shackles of poverty. Mimi's youth passed within the gray, dirty walls of factories and plants. When Wen Xiao reached the age of 17, little had improved in her life. But one encounter changed her entire future. A friend invited her to a picnic where she met a modest young man, a janitor named Sim Wakum. He worked as a cleaner at the Singapore Housing and Development Board and sometimes took on a side job as a cafeteria vendor in a school. Like Mimi, he came from an impoverished family and worked hard to achieve the financial stability that had always been lacking. Their shared poverty and tireless diligence served as fertile ground first for friendship and later for romantic relations. Sim tolerated when Xiao's explosive character was of a gentle and phlegmatic nature. Neighbors spoke of him as a kind of naive person who was easy to deceive. Perhaps this is what attracted Mimi. The first 2 years of their relationship were filled with the magic of pure youthful love. They went on countless dates and walks, exchanged romantic promises, and most importantly, made big plans for their future together. Dreaming of starting a family and spending the rest of their lives together, Sim and Mimi seemed like an inseparable couple for whom nothing could stand in the way. Sim, being madly in love with his slender, black-haired chosen one, turned a blind eye to many of the oddities in her behavior, her eccentric and sometimes even hysterical outbursts, and dismissed them as his beloved's difficult character, not suspecting what trials fate had in store for them. And so the couple married in 1958, and in the same year they had their first son. The young family was embarking on the path to an ideal, bright future. The husband works, the young mother takes care of the baby at home, but over time, the colors began to darken over the newly minted family. Wong Weng Siu's character became worse and worse, and her hereditary mental illnesses began to manifest in full force. She often tormented Sim both mentally and physically. At one point, their quarrel escalated from threats to action. Sim was left with a scar on his forehead as a reminder that he needed to flee the house if his wife ever fell into a state of uncontrollable psychosis again. The patient husband silently endured all the abuse from his wife, finding solace in the bar over a mug of beer and games of gambling. In 1962, Mimi gave birth to the second son, but by then, Sim had immersed himself in his addictions, sank into endless debt, and lacking the willpower to overcome alcoholism and gambling addiction, lost his job. Of course, Mimi could not afford to slide back into poverty. Without even taking time to recover from childbirth, she found a side job. With her attractive appearance, she landed a position as a hostess at the Flamingo Cabaret Bar. It is important to know that in Asia, hostesses are dancers in special bars intended only for men. In such establishments, a hostess had many different duties. She would greet guests, serve drinks, light their cigarettes, engage in flirtatious conversations, and entertain them with performances and dances. Many men would come to the bar just to spend time with the hostess girls. The dancers could also go beyond their usual duties if they wanted to earn significantly more money or secure a relatively stable income. Consumed by jealousy and sense of his own worthlessness, as Sim saw it, he plunged even deeper into the world of drinking and gambling. Things went so far that in the end, Sim began stealing money from his wife and gambling away the hard-earned family budget. Eventually, just a year after the birth of their second son, Mimi, disillusioned with family life and her husband in particular, packed her bags and left scene, leaving him with their two sons to care for. After her divorce, Wong Weng Siu continued to work as a hostess in the cabaret bar and took on the coquettish pseudonym Mimi Wong. All her dreams began to come true. Countless throngs of admirers, good pay, and the recognition of hundreds of men. Mimi Wong was rapidly gaining popularity among the guests, working hard, and even won a contest for the title of a queen among hostesses in Singapore. She loved this job, and of course, she was thrilled with her status as an attractive and desired beauty. In 1966, 3 years after her divorce, Mimi met Hiroshi Watanabe, an attractive and successful Japanese man. He had left his wife and 3 children back home in Japan while he went to work in Singapore. He was a high-ranking engineer at the major Japanese corporation and was responsible for the implementation of a land reclamation project in the east of Singapore. It was just a year after Singapore gained independence, and many international companies were coming to launch various projects to improve infrastructure and business development. He visited the cabaret bar where Mimi worked several times, and at their first meeting, he was struck by her beauty and grace. Enchanted by her feminine charm and lightness, he became a regular guest at the establishment. Watanabe would come every evening after work and to be entertained with Mimi's company. After a few weeks of regular visits, their relationship went beyond the walls of the bar and they became lovers, although both were well aware that their relationship would never become a happy love story. For Hiroshi was married and had no intention of leaving his wife and children. He had no plans to destroy his marriage and he wanted to keep his family, while he saw Mimi as a temporary diversion. But as often happens, a light, fleeting affair can take an unexpected turn, and in their case, the turning point was Mimi's pregnancy. Of course, this was not part of Hiroshi's plans, and Mimi was not thrilled at the prospect of giving birth out of a wedlock, losing her job, and raising a child as a single mother. As always in her life, Mimi took matters into her own hands and went to Penang, Malaysia, to have an abortion. Even then, her relationship with Hiroshi began to cool, for Hiroshi did not even give his mistress money for the abortion, claiming that he barely had any money left himself. Despite this seemingly telling situation, they managed to preserve their relationship and continued to spend evenings in each other's company. Throughout their relationship, as Hiroshi later claimed in court, Mimi became pregnant twice, and each time it ended with a decision to terminate the pregnancy and get rid of the unwanted child. In 1968, 2 years after starting her regular meetings with Hiroshi, Mimi met a businessman from Hong Kong. In her opinion, he was a more promising partner, and there was no negative history between them. This was a chance for Mimi to establish a more stable relationship and finally become the wife of the wealthy businessman. She went to live with him in Hong Kong, but maintained contact with Hiroshi, who remained in Singapore. They exchanged love letters, colorfully discussing their feelings and desires for each other. For Mimi, it was important to stop being a mistress and finally become the legal wife of a rich man who could provide her and her children with a comfortable life. She was so eager to tie her new partner to herself that she soon became pregnant after the start of their relationship. But when the man learned that Wong was pregnant with his child, he simply kicked her out of his home. This time, Mimi found herself in a position where she could not have an abortion. She had to return to Singapore, where a few months later she gave birth to a daughter. And of course, she had to find a job again. This time, Mimi Wong became a social escort. This meager income was enough to Mimi to support herself and her young daughter. Sometime after returning to Singapore, Hiroshi reappeared in Mimi's life. but if only he had known what it would cost him. They became lovers again, and this time Watanabe was more insistent and more thoughtful towards Mimi. He rented a room for her and her daughter on Alexander Road and gave her $200 a month for her needs. And a few months later, the three of them, Hiroshi, Mimi, and her daughter, moved to a modest but cozy apartment on Everett Road. Even at home, Mimi remained the same luxurious hostess dancer she had once been at the cabaret, so she demanded more and more attention and money from Watanabe, and he, of course, indulged her. Mimi hired a maid to have more time for her daughter and her work, no longer worrying about cleaning the house. At last, she was no longer Cinderella, and it seemed that this perfect fairy tale that Mimi had dreamed of had come true. Everything was as she wanted. Her long-awaited daughter, her beloved man who cared for her, her own apartment practically in the heart of Singapore. But the fairy tale did not last long. On a cold December evening, a week before Christmas, Mimi was resting after a hard day's work, settled in a chair in the middle of the room, and it seemed that life had finally fallen into place and only the best was ahead. She was planning how she would spend the winter holidays, imagining what gift she would buy for her beloved man, and pondering whether she could find an interesting toy at the market not far from home for her daughter, who was not even a year old yet. But her fantasies were interrupted by Hiroshi. On Tuesday, my wife and kids are coming, and I have to spend the holidays with them, Hiroshi sheepishly blurted out. With obvious fury in her voice, Mimi told him straight to his face, "You know that if you have left me, I will destroy everything dear to you. I will destroy your precious family. I hope you understand that." As Hiroshi later stated in court, he was already planning to break off the relationship with Wong at that point, but was afraid of her subsequent actions. He told detectives that he was aware of Mimi's volatile temper, as well as the fact that she often abused alcohol, which made her even more aggressive. That is why he was afraid of Mimi and her reaction to the breakup. For several days, Hiroshi tried to persuade Mimi to meet his family, convincing her that she was an integral part of it, trying to minimize Mimi's jealousy and protect his loved ones from Mimi's rash actions. Their arguing during those days was accompanied by threats from Mimi Wong. She clearly did not want to share her lover with anyone else. But in the end, Hiroshi persuaded her to meet his family. On Tuesday, December 23, 1969, Hiroshi's wife Ayako Watanabe and their three children arrived in Singapore. Hiroshi could think of nothing better than to immediately take them to Everett Road to introduce them to Wong and her daughter. Seeing how Hiroshi treated his children, Mimi calmed down a bit. But she was torn by anger and jealousy at the mere sight of Iago. Of course, she did not show it. Treating them to sweets, she gradually built a rapport with Hiroshi's children. They even started affectionately calling her Obasan, which means auntie in Japanese. For the winter holidays, the Watanabe family settled into a rented house on a Jalan Seaview, just a few blocks from Mimi Wong. Mimi, of course, was not invited to the New Year's Eve party planned by the Watanabe family. But to avoid upsetting his mistress, Hiroshi, after the family dinner, went to Mimi to come and reassure her. Considerably drunk, he arrived at Wong's place. She immediately pounced at him with questions about how the party went. Of course, Mimi hoped to hear from Hiroshi that he did not enjoy it and wanted to spend all the holidays with her, leaving his family behind. But reality turned out to be different. The drunken man began to ramble on and share his impressions of the event. Not controlling his speech, he began to recount his wife's words about Mimi. She had called her a prostitute and an alcoholic, forbidding her husband from having any contact with the strange woman. Combined with her former jealousy, Mimi felt insulted and humiliated. She put herself above Ayako and always felt superior to the simple Japanese housewife. But now she was bursting with indignation. She could not just leave such an insult, and she could no longer control her emotions. The next day, consumed by rage, Mimi went to her ex-husband, the poor alcoholic and janitor Sim-Wok-Kum. Enraged, she began to tell him how unfairly she had been slandered and accused of living a dissolute life, when she claimed she had been polite and hospitable to the Watanabe family. Suddenly, in a fit of rage, Mimi declared that she intended to kill her offender and needed an assistant in this difficult task. She even offered her ex-husband a small amount of money to help. Sim-Wok-Kum had been living in poverty all these years, as he alone took care of his elderly mother and the two sons Mimi had left in his care. So any reward, even a modest one, would have been very welcome. This fact and his long, lingering, undying love for Mimi prompted him to become an accomplice to the crime. Everything was finally decided on the morning of January 6th, 1970. Hiroshi Watanabe had come for dinner to Mimi's place on Everett Road on the evening of January 5th, spent the night with her, and in the morning was already getting ready for work. And there, it seemed, Mimi gave him one last chance, making sure he would come back tonight and stay the night again. She said she wanted to surprise him and hoped he would stay the night, but Hiroshi refused, saying that today he would be working longer than usual and would only be free around midnight, at which point he would go straight to his family. Mimi immediately realized that this was the perfect opportunity to finally deal with Ayako, who had become a thorn in Mimi's side, ruining her entire familiar way of life. On the evening of January 6th, Mimi and her ex-husband Sim-Wok-Kum went to the Watanabe family home while Hiroshi was at work. Dressed as a janitor, Sim rode along a can of toilet cleaning fluid, while Mimi armed herself with gloves and a small kitchen knife. Softly and with a barely concealed smile, Mimi rang the doorbell and assured Ayako, who opened the door, that she had merely brought a worker to unclog the toilet. Believing her, Ayako led the pair into the house and led them to the bathroom. By that time, two of the Watanabe children were already asleep. Only the eldest daughter, Chiyako, was still awake, sitting quietly in her room, trying to fall asleep. Suddenly, a piercing scream rang out. Chiyako could not tell if it was her mother's scream or someone else's. She left her room and headed towards the source of the noise. Quietly approaching, she saw Auntie Mimi and some man standing in the bathroom, while her mother, clutching her head, sat on the bathroom floor. Red stains had almost completely covered her new house dress. Mimi continued to strike blows with the knife to Ayako's neck and stomach. Seeing this, Chiyako screamed and began to cry loudly. The child's scream interrupted the brutal scene of murder. The flustered Wong quickly ran up to her and covered her mouth with a blood-stained hand. Mastering her strength, Chiyako fell silent and tore herself away from the once kind Auntie Mimi's grip. She ran to the bedroom to wake her brother and sister, while Sim and Mimi ran out of the house and quickly disappeared into the dark streets of Singapore. The three Watanabe children went into the bathroom and tried to revive their mother, but it was too late. Ayako died quickly from blood loss, as two blows struck major blood vessels in her neck, and one blow to the abdomen finished her off, leaving not a single chance of survival. Hiroshi Watanabe returned home closer to the night. The house was suspiciously quiet, and the first floor, where the lights were always on, was dark and deserted. Only soft sobs and sniffles caught his attention, and he headed for the bathroom. Seeing his children mourning his wife's body, Hiroshi flew into a hysterical fit and seemed unable to utter a word. Gathering his last bit of strength, he asked the children what had happened. Chieko, through tears, told him. Auntie Mimi came and some worker. They attacked Mom in the bathroom and then they ran away. Hiroshi called the police and they all went to the station. Detective Tan Kim Hae immediately began the search. The very next day, he arrested the former couple. Wong tried to hide at her foster mother's house, but the police quickly found her thanks to the neighbor's tip, and they found Sim at a friend's apartment. Little Chieko conducted an identification lineup comparing Wong and Sim to other people. Chieko immediately recognized them as the very villains who had so cold-bloodedly taken her mother's life. The trial of Mimi Wong and Sim Wakum did not begin until November 1970. During the court proceedings, Wong and Sim traded mutual accusations of murder. Wong insisted that her ex-husband alone was responsible for Ayako Watanabe's death, describing the moment when, during an argument in the bathroom with Ayako, Sim intervened, separated them, and ultimately struck the fatal blow to the victim as she was heading for the exit. Additionally, Wong resorted to a defense based on insanity, claiming that at the time of the crime, she was in a state of intoxication. It was also noted that Mimi's psychiatrist, Dr. Wang Chong, confirmed that she suffered from the Japanese encephalitis contracted from Hiroshi, which led to a viral infection of the brain and consequently impaired her mental faculties at the moment of the murder. Despite this, the prosecution's psychiatrist maintained that Wong was of sound mind and clarity when she committed Ayako's murder. Sim, although he had confessed to the police that he did indeed help his ex-wife commit the murder, later began to deny this, claiming that he was simply trying to break up the two fighting women and was an accidental witness to Mimi killing Ayako. According to him, out of fear of being held accountable for his wife's actions, he decided to flee from the police. After 26 days of intense court proceedings, on December 7, 1970, the moment of truth arrived. Judge Tan Ah Tech delivered his verdict. According to it, Mimi Wong and Sim Wakum were found guilty of murder by prior conspiracy and sentenced to the most severe possible punishment, the death penalty. The judges, in collaboration with a team of psychiatrists, concluded that at the time of committing the murder, Mimi Wong was aware of the gravity of her actions and was mentally sound, which would have allowed her to stop in case of unpremeditated violence. This position of the psychiatrist refuted the defendant's sole line of defense. As for Sim, the judges were unwavering in their decision that he should take full responsibility for the murder, since he shared Mimi's intent to carry out this crime. Thus, his fate was sealed, and the judges passed the same sentence as Mimi Wong, death for them both. After the lengthy legal proceedings, immediately after the sentencing, Mimi Wong was transferred to Changi prison, where she was held in the death row cell block. She exhibited inappropriate behavior, often undressing completely and periodically dousing the guards with her excrement. The chief executioner of Changi prison, Darshan Singh, was a very charming and stately man, so Mimi tried her best to charm him and start a romance, but her attempts were unsuccessful. Darshan was a married man who, throughout his career, had seen many female criminals trying to seduce him. However, he was the only person in the prison who was able to dissuade her from destructive behavior. "You're too beautiful for that kind of behavior," Darshan would reassure her. Flirting with the prison's chief officer did not benefit Mimi in any way. Perhaps it brightened her last days in solitary, but she clearly expected more. Mimi had no intention of giving up so easily. After all, she loved life and did not want to part with it because of some trifle, and she often told her guards, thereby downplaying the entire horror of her crime. Her decision and last hope was to file an appeal. Mimi's representative in court was the famous lawyer David Saul Marshall, who defended her at the first appeal hearing in March 1972. At the same time, in the same court, Sim Woo Kum's appeal was also being considered. Lawyer David Marshall managed to find 11 grounds for appeal, with the main emphasis being on the incompetence of the judges in the first instance, who unfairly failed to take into account Mimi's mental state and the consequent limited responsibility for her actions. In addition, he stressed that Mimi Wong did not intend to kill Yako, seeking a new trial on charges of unintentional manslaughter. In response, the prosecution presented a number of arguments refuting all grounds for appeal. For example, the fact that Miss Wong was able to quickly wash the blood of herself and her clothes after the murder, they argued, showed that she was fully aware of the crime she had committed and was trying to get rid of the evidence, as well as the fact that she did not come alone to confront Ayako, brought Sim with her because she knew that Miss Watanabe was well versed in martial arts and understood that she could not handle the murder on her own. Sim's appeal was heard on the same day. His lawyers insisted that Sim Woo Kum had no intention of killing Ayako and he had no idea about Mimi's plans. But these arguments did not convince the judges either, because the fact that he came dressed as a worker and of the toilet cleaner suggested that he and Mimi had some kind of plan that he was following. Sim's appeal was denied simultaneously with Mimi's. After the first unsuccessful appeal of the verdict in court, Sim and Mimi filed for special permission to appeal to the Judicial Committee of the Privy Council in London. It is unclear what they were counting on. Of course, their requests were denied. The lawyer we are already familiar with, David Saul Marshall, was not in vain one of Singapore's most famous lawyers. He served as the first Chief Minister of Singapore in 1955-1956, but then went into law. Marshall claimed that his acquittal rate was 99 out of 100 in murder cases during the period when jury trials were still allowed. In 1969, the jury system in Singapore was abolished and Marshall was no longer so confident in his abilities. He was clearly losing Mimi Wong's case. Therefore, he decided to take advantage of his old connections and appealed directly to the President of Singapore for a pardon. He pleaded with the President to meet him halfway and commute the death sentence to life imprisonment. As he claimed, this had to be done, at the very least, for humanitarian reasons. He focused attention on Mimi Wong's poverty as a child, her sad childhood, and her sincere desire for repentance during her time in prison. This allowed Mimi to remain in the death row cell block only until the end of July 1973. For on July 23rd, a meeting of the Council of Ministers headed by the President of Singapore, Benjamin Sheares, anonymously decided to deny Miss Wong and her former husband a pardon. The case of Mimi Wong and Sim Woo Kum was passed to the Chief Justice and he set the date of execution, on July 27, 1973. Both were to be executed on the same day. Such a vibrant and eccentric woman as Mimi Wong could not simply depart quietly. Even her execution turned into a grotesque spectacle. Before she was executed, she asked to wear her old wedding dress in which she and Sim Woo Kum had married. Her last wish was granted. The 34-year-old Mimi Wong in a wedding dress and her 40-year-old ex-husband Sim Woo Kum in a formal suit were hanging together at dawn on July 27, 1973. Among the officers of Changi prison, there was a rumor that the day before the execution, Mimi made a wish that her prison executioner and friend Darshan Singh would become her lover and husband in her next life. She swore to take him with her to the other side. Mysteriously, after Mimi Wong was hanged, Darshan fell seriously ill and was hospitalized at Toa Payoh Hospital, where he spent about a month in total. After the execution, Mimi Wong and her once husband Sim Wakun were buried in the neighboring graves. Her 4-year-old daughter laid flowers on the grave and left a note and a headstone: "To my beloved mother." The two sons of Mimi and Sim were taken into care of social services and looked after until they came of age. And so ended the shocking story of the first couple sentenced to death in Singapore. I cannot say that there is a shred of romance in this case. 3 children were left orphaned, and another 3 were left without a mother. And the culprit was greed, insane love, and an inordinate desire for power over another's life. Despite all of Mimi's claims of reform and awareness of her crime, it seems that she remained the same provocative, explosive Mimi even with her last breath. Flirting with the executioner in a wedding dress, she turned her entire life, even its end, into a spectacle